It's one of the biggest stories around, but you rarely hear about it in the major news media. The persecution of Christians all around the world. Take a look.
More people around the world embrace Christianity than any other religion, and Christians are the most persecuted.
Persecution of Christians is growing around the world, and Congress needs to pay more attention to it. It needs to be a higher priority issue in our relations with all of these countries where this persecution takes place.
That persecution happens most often in the Muslim world, as the terror group identifying itself as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, sweeps across Iraq, creating a bloodbath. Iraqi Christians send out an urgent call for prayer. Tens of thousands of Christians have fled the country so far. Then there's Egypt. More than 500 Christian women have been kidnapped in that country since 2011 and forced to convert to Islam. In Nigeria, the terrorist group Boko Haram abducted nearly 300 schoolgirls and has waged a violent campaign against Christians. And in Iran, Pastor Saeed Abedini remains in prison and has endured torture for his Christian faith. The persecution takes different forms depending on the country where Christians live. In Pakistan, for example, Christians are tolerated, but they have to be careful about what they say. Simply defending their faith can lead to imprisonment and a possible death sentence there. While in Somalia, a Muslim who converts from Islam to Christianity can be killed. Today, Christians face violence, displacement, or discrimination in 110 nations around the world. Mark Martin, CBN News.
CBN News contributor Raymond Ibrahim is joining us now. He's an expert on Islamic persecution. He's written about it in his book called Crucified Again, a fabulous book. Raymond, good to have you again.
Good to be with you, Pat. Thank you.
Talk about what's going on. For example, in Egypt, I understand they have a vicious practice against women. What are they doing?
Well, you know, to preface it, we all heard about Boko Haram in Nigeria, the Islamic terrorist organization who went and kidnapped up to 300 mostly Christian girls. And they enslave them, and they justify it through Islamic teachings. In fact, the Quran, which says that if you conquer a woman, an infidel woman, as part of the jihad, she becomes your concubine. And we heard about that in Nigeria. And the reason I bring that up is because if then you move to Egypt, you move to so many other countries, and it's the same exact story, but of course we don't hear about it. So in Egypt, since about 2011, 500 young Coptic Christian girls have been abducted, lured away, forced into conversion, raped, shamed, and married, as they would put it, and become Muslims, and then they just disappear.
You don't hear anything about that.
You don't, and that's what I mean. So it was amazing to me that the Boko Haram story came up, which is good, and yet that is just the tip of the iceberg. That's happening all around the Islamic world.
What about this? Look, it's the most amazing thing in Iraq. You've got 4,500, maybe 5,000 fighters with pickup trucks and Kalashnikov weapons, and they have overcome an army of 600,000-700,000 people. What's the deal there?
It's really mind-boggling. You know, if you look at the big picture, a little over a decade ago, the United States went in to topple the autocratic bad guy, Saddam Hussein. 10 years later, you would think we would have something as good as at least it was, and now it's just chaos there. You have an Islamic State that has come into being that is being portrayed as much worse than Al-Qaeda. And, you know, it's just depressing to think that everywhere that the U.S. goes in, it's the same thing in Afghanistan. They go in there, and now you got more of those terrorists. Same thing with the Arab Spring issue.
What do you think? I mean, is it myopia on the part of the leaders of our country? Don't they understand the threat? Well, what's the deal?
I do believe a lot of it is myopia, and I think it's myopia because of the nature of the U.S. government and democracy. It's they're focused on their tenure. They're of a president 4 years or 8 years, and so they want to make it look good and make it work during that time. So they end up taking very short-term, short-sighted, myopic measures. But if you look at them, these measures are always, in the long run, going to lead to something that's really disastrous. And this, I mean, the rise of this Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and this is just terrible. And you see what's happening to Christians and others and
Well, I mean, again, I mean, how could they have done it? As I say, they're a bunch of ragtag guys with pickup trucks and machine guns, and they overrun a whole army. How did they do that?
Well, if you want, I'll give you the Arab world's view.
Yeah, sure.
And the Arab world view is that the United States is helping them. The United States is empowering them, alternatively, as the strong horse. And it's not because they like them, but it's because they're creating a sort of chaotic situation to have them all fight each other, and to sort of basically weaken these regions and bring little sects. That's the Arab world narrative, which is mainstream.
Are you serious? I mean, that's appearing in like Al Jazeera or in the newspapers or something like that?
No, Al Jazeera, well, Al Jazeera works very much with Western media, so there wouldn't be Al Jazeera, but the more local and, you know, the Arab street, that's the idea. That, because as you're saying, how can the United States and, you know, how can't we beat, you know, this ragtag army or army, I don't even want to call it army. And so the logic is because I guess we're not trying to, and we're using them. And that's what we're seeing in Syria, for example, when the United States comes and John McCain is taking pictures with basically kidnappers and terrorists and, you know, portraying them as freedom fighters. And, you know, apparently it's just kind of divide and conquer.
Well, we really don't understand the Arab mind. We don't understand the relationship between Sunni and Shia and all these groups. Is that the problem?
It's a little bit of not understanding and that myopia and it's really cultural arrogance projecting our principles, you know, democracy onto them without understanding, you know, the thousands of years of history that has helped form the Arab mind and the Middle East in general.
I read somebody, but Cheney, he said, we're going to, quote, stand up a country over in Iraq. And you don't stand up a country against thousands of years.
Exactly. And it got bad with this whole Arab Spring that you'll recall, which was, you know, so touted in the media. And you've seen how it ended in every single country. Libya, in Egypt. It's sad. Egypt is the one country where the United States, again, promoted the Arab Spring. Muslim Brotherhood came to power. And it was left to the Egyptians to get rid of the Brotherhood and the Islamists to American censure. And it culminates with Egyptians holding signs of Obama, calling him a terrorist, and pictures of him with a beard and portraying him as the guy who supports the Islamists. And yet we should be supporting, you know, the more secular, democratically minded.
Right. Sudan. I went to Sudan some years ago when it was fairly friendly, and I think the guy was named Numeri, who was the president. We met with him. I was with George Bush Sr. At the time. And Sudan has gone to become a vicious state. What about that woman? I mean, what did they do to her and why? What was the reason for this?
Well, her great crime is that this woman wants to be a Christian and she refuses to renounce Christianity in the name of Islam because they say she's born a Muslim, and according to Islamic law, and this is true, if you're born Muslim and you leave the religion, you become a Christian or whatever, you become executed. So they're really upholding Islamic law, and it's, as you're alluding, it's very sadistic. You know, I mean, this is a criminal, a woman who is pregnant, and probably a good citizen, and all she wants to do is freedom of conviction of faith, and she's not given that. But the sad part is, you know, a lot of times we think it's localized, and we think of Sudan, and certainly in Sudan that's the case. But, you know, go to Iran, which is a country that has very little to do with Sudan, except for the Islamic element, and we have the same situation going on there. We have an American pastor, Abedini, in jail, being tortured, being forced to renounce Christianity. We had before him Pastor Yusuf Nader Khani, who was also very similar to the Raymond Ibrahim story because he was kept in because he was an apostate. Now he's a Christian. They're trying to force him to become a Muslim.
Listen, why isn't there some outrage? I mean, why do the liberals in America, the so-called leftist progressives, why do they side with these people? Don't they understand or do they just hate Christianity so badly that anything's anti-Christian they like?
I think that is definitely a big part of it. There's this, you know, ingrained bias towards Christianity. So if it's Christians who are being the victims, then oh well, you know, they have it coming because they're the bad guys anyway. But a lot of it is just, you know, they just don't understand. It's become, I think they're so indoctrinated and brainwashed in their own narratives that they buy into it. And so they can't see what's common sense. This is common sense. You see the same patterns happening in all these countries. The Muslims come and say it's our teachings, and yet we still have to reject it. And our American leaders and politicians say, no, no, that's not Islam, etc.
What about the fact that this ISIS may well have bombs that go through metal detectors and that they might be blowing up planes here in America. Is there any truth to that, do you think?
Oh, I certainly believe, look, when you look at what's happening in the Middle East, and I specifically like to talk about the persecution of Christians, not simply because of its intrinsic importance, but where you see Christians being persecuted, you can know for a fact that that area is becoming ultra-radicalized because they're being persecuted. Why? Because you got Islamic radical militants. And now we're seeing in all these countries the rise of these guys like ISIS. So you know these guys are having these, are developing these weapons, are getting these weapons, and guess what? We're the same infidels. We're in the same. We are hated just like those people, the Christians and other non-Sunnis who are beneath them, and so it's a matter of time. And that's why what is happening there is immensely important to what can happen here.
Raymond's book is called Crucified Again. It's an extraordinarily insightful book on what's going on in this region by somebody who is fluent in Arabic and also fluent in the teachings of Islam. Crucified Again, I commend it. It's been out for a while, but it's still available at Amazon where books are sold. Raymond, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pat. God bless you.